Before 1910, America had 155 medical schools. After 1910, it had 31. The old remedies did not disappear because they were tested and found wanting. Many of them disappeared because the teachers who carried them were gone. That is the question this investigation begins with. There was a time, not long ago in historical terms, when a person living in rural Ohio or Western Virginia or the farming edges of Missouri could walk into a medical office and be treated by a physician trained in botanical medicine or homeopathy, or what was called eclectic medicine, a system that drew on plant-based treatments, older herbal knowledge, and clinical observation accumulated across generations of American practice. These were not fringe practitioners hiding in the shadows. They had schools, they had journals, they had graduates practicing across the country. In some regions, they were the majority of medical care available. The system before 1910 was not unified. It was not clean. It was competitive, sometimes chaotic, and genuinely varied. But it was plural. Different approaches competed inside an open field. And within that field, some of the oldest remedies in American medicine, many of them drawn from indigenous knowledge, from the plant traditions of enslaved communities, from centuries of practical observation, were still being actively taught, practiced, and passed forward. Then came the report. The next part is not about medicine. It is about who got to decide what medicine was allowed to become. In 1910, a man named Abraham Flexner published a report commissioned by the Carnegie Foundation. Flexner was not a physician. He was an educator, a former school administrator from Louisville, Kentucky. He had no medical degree. What he had was access. He spent roughly 18 months visiting medical schools across the United States and Canada, compiling observations about their facilities, their laboratory equipment, their clinical arrangements, and their standards of admission. The Flexner Report, formerly titled Medical Education in the United States and Canada, concluded that American medical education was in a state of disorder. Too many schools, too little standardization, too many graduates produced without adequate scientific training. The report was not secret, it was published and circulated widely, and it had genuine points of concern. Some medical schools of that era were operating with poor facilities, limited laboratory access, and inadequate clinical training. Those concerns were real, but the report did something else alongside its legitimate criticisms. It drew sharp distinctions between the kind of medicine it considered legitimate and the kind it did not. Laboratory science was the standard. Germ theory, chemistry, pathology, anatomy, these were the pillars of what Flexner called scientific medicine. Systems that operated outside this framework, regardless of their clinical history, were classified as sectarian. The word had a specific weight. It meant they were outside the real thing. Botanical medicine was sectarian. Homeopathy was sectarian. Eclectic medicine was sectarian. These were not new labels created by the report. But the report gave institutional weight to a boundary that had been contested for decades. And after 1910, that boundary became the basis for deciding who received funding, who received licensing support, and which schools were allowed to remain open. Now, follow the money. The Carnegie Foundation funded the Flexner Report. The Rockefeller family, through the General Education Board, had by this period already begun directing large sums toward medical education. The amounts were significant enough to reshape institutional priorities. Medical schools that aligned with the laboratory science model attracted this funding. Medical schools that did not align were, in many cases, left without the financial support needed to meet the new standards being demanded of them. The records here are not hidden. The funding relationships are documented. The General Education Board's grants to medical education during this period are traceable through institutional histories and foundation archives. The argument is not that a conspiracy was assembled in secret. The argument is simpler and more verifiable than that. Institutions with money helped determine which schools survived. The schools that survived taught one kind of medicine. The schools that closed had largely been teaching something different. Between 1910 and 1930, the number of medical schools in the United States dropped from approximately 155 to 31. That is a reduction of roughly 80%. Among the schools that closed were the majority of homeopathic medical colleges, nearly all of the eclectic medical schools, and a substantial number of institutions that had trained physicians in botanical traditions. Some of these schools were genuinely underfunded and poorly equipped, but not all of them. Several were well-established institutions with decades of clinical records, trained faculty, and practicing graduates whose outcomes were, by the evidence available, at least comparable to their contemporaries. They closed anyway. The old schools did not vanish because every remedy failed. Many vanished because the teachers disappeared first. When a school closes, the knowledge it carries does not vanish in a single day. It moves differently than that. It slows. It scatters. An older physician trained in eclectic medicine retires, and the student who might have learned that system from him is instead trained at the surviving schools, in the surviving curriculum, by faculty selected for their alignment with the new standard. Within a generation, the clinical knowledge that once had an institutional home no longer does. It exists in old textbooks that are not reprinted, in journals that stop publishing, in the practices of retiring physicians who trained before 1910 and whose methods leave the field when they do. The Eclectic Medical College of Cincinnati, which had trained physicians in plant-based and compound remedies since the mid-1800s, closed in 1939. The National College of Natural Medicine, with its roots in botanical practice, struggled for decades. Homeopathic colleges that had been operating since before the Civil War found their accreditation and licensing pathways narrowing in ways that made continued operation increasingly impossible. And as each school closed, the specific remedies it had been teaching, some of them documented across decades of clinical use, became harder to access. Not because they had been tested in the new laboratories and found ineffective. Many of them were never tested in the new laboratories at all. They were not disproven. They were not included. The system that would have been required to evaluate them had already decided that the institutions teaching them were outside the boundary. What happened here was not primarily scientific. It was institutional. The question of whether something worked was, in many cases, never asked inside the new system. The question of whether it belonged was asked first, and in most cases, the answer was no. There is a tendency, when looking back at this period, to present it as a straightforward story of progress. And in many respects, the transformation of American medicine after 1910 did produce real and important advances. Sanitation improved, surgical outcomes improved, the understanding of infectious disease expanded, vaccines became more reliable. Diagnostic tools became more precise. These are not small things. They are not propaganda. They are recorded improvements in human health outcomes, and any fair accounting of this period acknowledges them directly. But the question worth holding is this: did standardization improve medicine, or did it also narrow medicine? Can both things be true at the same time? The answer the historical record suggests is yes. Both things are true. The system that emerged after 1910 became better at treating infections, injuries, and conditions that responded to pharmaceutical intervention and surgical precision. It became simultaneously less equipped and eventually less willing to engage with plant-based treatments, multi-system approaches, and the kinds of longitudinal clinical observation that some of the older schools had been practicing. Modern herbalism, traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, and the traditions of many indigenous healers continued to exist after 1910, but they existed outside the credentialed system. They could not be taught in accredited medical schools. They could not be documented in clinical training. They could not be carried forward inside the institution that trained the majority of American physicians. What that means, in practical terms, is that several generations of physicians trained after 1910 were never introduced to the plant-based remedies that earlier physicians had used and recorded. Not because those remedies had been evaluated and rejected, because the curriculum that might have examined them had been replaced before the evaluation ever took place. The final problem is simple. A system can win a debate without ever giving the other side a fair trial. The question this record leaves open is not whether modern medicine has value. It clearly does. The question is whether the process that created modern medicine also removed options that might have value, without the comparison that would have made the removal a scientific conclusion rather than an institutional one. The Flexner Report did not test botanical remedies in a laboratory and find them lacking. It classified the schools, teaching them as unscientific, and used that classification to justify their removal from the funded, accredited, licensing-eligible landscape of American medicine. The remedies went with the schools. And what was lost in that process, whether it was nothing or something or more than we have yet accounted for, is a question the surviving records cannot fully answer. Because the records that would have answered it, the clinical observations of eclectic physicians, the documented outcomes of botanical practitioners, the accumulated case notes of homeopathic colleges with decades of practice, were not integrated into the new system. They were, in most cases, set aside as the schools that produced them were closed, and the physicians trained in them retired without successors. The old remedies may not have lost a fair trial. They may have lost the classroom, the funding, the institutions, and the right to be remembered inside the system that replaced them. Whether that system asked the right questions before drawing its boundaries is a question the timeline does not clearly resolve. The visuals and storyline reconstruction in this video were assisted by AI, because sometimes the only way to show what was removed is to rebuild the scene from the surviving records. If this timeline changes how you see medical history, write the detail that bothered you most in the comments. Subscribe if you want the next record opened. This investigation is not finished.